I have to tell you something I've been thinking about for almost 3 years now. Every night for most of my adult life, I sat down to what I believed was a perfectly healthy dinner. A good portion of white rice, some pasta with vegetables, corn on the side, maybe a slice of white bread to go with it. I felt good about those meals. I felt responsible. My name is Margaret. I'm 79 years old, and those dinners, those carefully prepared home-cooked meals that I was genuinely proud of, were quietly starving my brain while I slept. And the fog I had been living inside for 2 years wasn't just age. It wasn't inevitable. It was on my dinner plate every single evening. If you're over 60 and you eat rice, pasta, corn, or bread at night, please stay with me, because what I found out changed my evenings, changed my sleep, and changed something I had started to believe was just gone for good. I want to describe my situation honestly, because I think a lot of you will recognize it. About 2.5 years ago, I started having what I can only call a slow leak of memory. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a gradual draining away of sharpness. I'd walk into the kitchen and stand there. I'd lose words mid-sentence, not unusual words, ordinary ones. I'd read a paragraph in a book, and by the time I reached the end of it, the beginning had already dissolved. My daughter noticed before I admitted it to myself. She said, "Mom, you seem foggy." And she was right. I was foggy. A thick, persistent fog that was worst in the mornings and never fully lifted. My sleep had also changed. I was technically sleeping 7, sometimes 8 hours. But I was waking up feeling like the sleep hadn't done anything, like I'd been running in place all night instead of resting. I was tired in a heavy, unrestorative way that no amount of extra hours in bed seemed to fix. And in the afternoons I was almost useless. I'd sit in my chair and feel a kind of mental blankness that frightened me more than I let on. I mentioned all of this to my doctor. He asked me some questions, ran some tests, and then said something that I wrote down because it surprised me so much. He said, "Tell me what you eat for dinner." I described my evening meals, the rice, the pasta, the corn. He nodded slowly and said, "Those foods may be doing something to your sleep that you don't realize, and your brain is paying the price." That sent me to a nutritionist my neighbor had recommended, a woman who had spent decades working with older adults on dietary patterns. And she sat with me for almost 2 hours and walked me through something I had never once been told in 79 years of eating. When you eat high glycemic foods, foods that convert to glucose in the bloodstream very quickly, your blood sugar rises fast. A cup of white rice can raise your blood sugar almost as rapidly as drinking a glass of sugar water. Corn behaves similarly. White pasta, white bread. All of them send a fast surge of glucose into the blood within about 30 minutes of eating. When you eat these foods at lunch, your body has hours of activity ahead to burn through that glucose. But when you eat them at dinner, right before the longest stretch of inactivity in your entire day, that glucose surge has nowhere to go. It circulates. Your blood sugar stays elevated well into the night, sometimes for 3, 4, even 5 hours after you fall asleep. She told me about research showing that eating complex carbohydrates late at night results in prolonged elevated glucose levels during sleep compared to eating the same foods earlier in the day. Same food, different time, completely different effect on the body during sleep. Now here is the part that nobody had ever explained to me, and it is the part I most want you to understand. Your brain does something extraordinary while you sleep, something that simply cannot happen during the day. There is a system in your brain called the glymphatic system. Think of it as the brain's overnight cleaning crew. While you're in deep, slow-wave sleep, channels open up between your brain cells and cerebrospinal fluid flows through, washing away toxic waste products, including a protein called amyloid beta, which is one of the primary substances associated with Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. Research has confirmed that the vast majority of this brain waste clearance occurs during sleep, and almost none of it happens during waking hours. Sleep isn't rest, it's repair. It is the most important maintenance your brain receives. But here's what high blood sugar does to that process. When your blood sugar is elevated overnight from a high glycemic dinner, you spend far less time in deep, slow-wave sleep. Your body is busy managing the glucose surge. The lighter, less restorative stages of sleep dominate, and when you're not reaching deep sleep consistently, the glymphatic cleaning crew never fully shows up for work. Research found that the specific brain waves produced during deep sleep, called sleep spindles and slow waves, are what regulate the body's insulin sensitivity and blood sugar control the following day. It's a cycle. High glycemic dinner disrupts deep sleep, which disrupts next day blood sugar, which makes you crave more high glycemic food the next evening, which disrupts deep sleep again. The nutritionist described it to me in a way I've never forgotten. She said, "Imagine your brain as a building that gets cleaned every night from midnight until 6 in the morning. But the cleaning crew can only come in if the lights are off and everything is quiet. When you eat white rice and pasta for dinner, it's like leaving every light on in the building and playing loud music. The crew arrives, sees the chaos, and leaves. Night after night, the waste in the building accumulates, and eventually you start to notice it. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that a high glycemic diet was directly associated with greater amyloid burden in the brains of older adults, even in people who were cognitively normal at the time. The researchers were measuring the early accumulation of that toxic protein I mentioned before any symptoms appeared. The people eating the highest glycemic diets were building up more of it. The people eating lower glycemic diets were not. That is not a small finding. That is not a vague association. That is the food on your dinner plate directly influencing what accumulates inside your brain while you sleep. Stay with me because what I'm about to share is the part most people over 60 never hear. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because we are just getting to the part that actually changed my life. I want to be very specific about what I changed because vague advice is useless, and I want you to be able to do exactly what I did. The first thing I stopped eating at dinner was white rice. Completely. I had eaten it almost every evening for decades. I replaced it with lentils, not sometimes, regularly as my main evening starch. Lentils have one of the lowest glycemic indexes of any grain-like food. They digest slowly, release glucose gradually, and they are full of folate and magnesium, which researchers have identified as essential nutrients for brain cell function and neurotransmitter production. The blood sugar impact of a cup of lentils compared to a cup of white rice is not a small difference. It is dramatic. The second food I stopped eating at night was corn. I love corn. I still eat it occasionally at lunch. But corn at dinner, particularly sweet corn, behaves almost identically to table sugar in terms of how quickly it raises blood sugar. I didn't know that. I thought I was eating a vegetable. I replaced it at dinner with dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, arugula, sautéed in olive oil with a little garlic. almost zero glycemic impact, and loaded with B vitamins that a nutritionist told me are critical for protecting brain tissue as we age. The third change was pasta. I didn't eliminate pasta entirely. I shifted it to lunch on the days I wanted it. At dinner, I replaced it with baked salmon 2 or 3 times a week. Fatty fish like salmon is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA and EPA, which are the actual structural building blocks of brain cell membranes. Research consistently links regular consumption of fatty fish with better memory and slower cognitive decline in older adults. I wasn't eating it at all before this change. Now it's a centerpiece of my evenings. The fourth thing I changed was timing. I moved my dinner earlier, before 6:30 in the evening, so that whatever I ate had at least 3 hours to begin processing before I lay down. A nutritionist I later consulted explained that eating late compounds every glycemic effect I've described, because your metabolism slows significantly in the evening hours, and glucose lingers in the bloodstream far longer than it would after a midday meal. Within 3 weeks of these changes, I woke up one morning and the fog was different. Not gone, but noticeably thinner. I lay in bed and I could feel that the sleep had done something, that it had actually worked. By the end of the second month, I was finding words again. My daughter noticed before I brought it up. She said, "You seem like yourself." And I started crying at the kitchen table because that was exactly what it felt like coming back to myself after a long absence. I am 79 years old, and I spent 2 years in a fog that I accepted as the price of getting old. I ate my white rice and my pasta and my corn and my bread, and I called it healthy eating, and nobody ever told me what it was doing to my sleep or to the cleaning system inside my brain. Nobody explained to me that deep sleep is not a luxury. It is the only time my brain can flush the waste that builds toward Alzheimer's. Nobody told me that the food I ate at 6 in the evening was still raising my blood sugar at midnight. Now you know. Swap the white rice for lentils at dinner. Move the pasta to lunch. Replace the corn with dark greens. Add salmon to your evenings. Eat before 6:30 if you can manage it. These are not painful changes. They are just different choices, made with information I wish I'd had 20 years ago. Please share this with someone you love who is over 60, because I wish someone had told me this before the fog set in.